Hello everybody and welcome to my channel, where I read a bunch of books so you don't have to. This month we're talking about all 19 books I read in July, plus the 2 I did not finish. The first book is A Canticle for Liebowitz. This one's a classic that I finally got to. It was initially published in 1959 and it won the Hugo Award for Best Novel. The beginning of the story draws you right in. Within the first 2 pages, you understand that Brother Francis is a friar. He lives somewhere in the American Southwest, and that he's completing some sort of vigil by staying out in the wilderness. Then he stumbles into an underground cave of sorts. Except it's not a cave. It's something way cooler. I'll read the beginning passage for you to give you an idea of what I mean. On the wall of the stairwell, a half-buried sign remained legible. Fallout, survival, shelter. The rest was buried, but the first word was enough for Francis. He had never seen a fallout, and he'd hoped he'd never see one. A consistent description of the monster had not survived, but Francis had heard the legends. Brother Francis visualized Fallout as a half-salamander because, according to tradition, the thing was born in the flame deluge, and as half-incubus who despoiled virgins in their sleep, for were not the monsters of the world still called children of the Fallout? More and more about this mysterious event, the flame deluge, is revealed over the next several pages. Then Brother Francis returns to the monastery, and the novel focuses instead on many other things, but none of them the lore or anything dealing with Fallout. It's all about the monastery, the life there, St. Liebowitz's canonization, and the monk's decision eventually, spoiler alert, to colonize space to spread the word of God. Given that this novel was initially published in 3 different short stories, it's not fair to criticize this novel based on current standards, since such conventions weren't necessarily the motivating principle behind the construction of this novel. If the rest of the novel had proceeded with the same technique of presenting the audience with a lot more context than the characters know, A Canticle for Liebowitz could have been one of the most mind-blowing reads of all time. But that's not what this story is. Instead, we get one of the coolest beginnings to a book ever, and then the rest of the conflict is a Catholic sect trying to live in a post-apocalyptic southwestern United States. 2 out of 5 stars. Next is Tales of the City. Tales of the City is a charming novel. Rachel Maddow writes those exact words in her introduction to the book, and she's right. This is the first book in the series also called Tales of the City. So the novel and the series are both called Tales of the City. The first book was initially serialized in 2 different newspapers in 1974, before being published as a novel in 1978. Tales of the City was also adapted into a Netflix miniseries in 2019. Often when a novel has so many viewpoint characters, it becomes unclear who we should care about or why. It's hard to pick just one character to identify with. This is something that I say a lot. Surprisingly, Tales of the City doesn't suffer from the problem. Marianne Singleton's neighbor across the hall is Mona Ramsey, this histrionic woman who gets fired from her corporate job for being too self-righteous. She thinks the advertising campaign is all wrong, and she embarrasses the company. Then there's the gay romance subplot with Michael Tolovar. It was actually pretty okay. Uh, Allegedly, the newspaper editors kept track of how many gay characters there were in the story as it was being published in the newspaper, because they didn't want the number of gay characters to outnumber the number of straight characters. So Michael Tolovar, it has the gay romance subplot. It's pretty okay. As far as gay romance subplots go, I actually found it quite interesting. Another character is Norman Neil Williams, and he's this kind of weird guy who lives in the top floor of the building. Marianne eventually starts to befriend him. And now here's a spoiler warning. If you're going to read this book and don't want it to be spoiled, fast forward to the next chapter of this video. So Mona's lesbian lover, Dorothea, moves back from New York. Dorothea has been raking in money from her work as a model. She has this very different look about her. Not only is she black, she also has very unique features. So she's making a lot of money in New York. So Dorothea comes back to San Francisco and meets up with Mona. Mona wants to meet Dorothea's parents because the two women have been on again, off again for several years. So Dorothea says no, and Mona, thinking that Dorothea is just ashamed of the fact that they're both women, does a bit of detective work to find Dorothea's parents and then invites them over to dinner. Only it turns out Dorothea's parents are white, but Dorothea, as you remember, is not white. Except Dorothea is actually white. She had been using vitiligo meds and other things to make herself appear black. So this is a whole entire blackface storyline that didn't age very well and is actually somewhat uncomfortable. And then there's the issue of Norman. You'll remember he's the guy who lives upstairs on the roof. Marianne Singleton's sort of love interest. There's an investigation going on around him. No one's entirely sure why. Marianne Singleton goes up and investigates his dwelling and finds out that his secret is he's doing untoward things to children. When Marianne confronts him over it, he falls to his death. And at the end of this, the first novel finds Marianne covering up these untoward acts to protect Norman's legacy. So the stories and the writing style were somewhat charming, but the ending makes you wonder what the point of reading it was. If this is Marianne Singleton's heroic act, it doesn't feel very heroic. It actually leaves a quite unpleasant taste in your mouth. Having said that, it's up to you to decide whether or not you want to read this book. If you're very interested in LGBT literature, I would recommend this book with those hesitations. 2 out of 5 stars. The City of Night. Oh, City of Night. The City of Night. Wait, no, that's Music of the Night. Okay. City of Night is another LGBT book. It's intensely interesting. It was first published in 1963. The story follows a young man who's hustling, i.e., selling his body to other men. As this young man travels from New York to Los Angeles to San Francisco to New Orleans, he makes his money largely from hustling. The narrative style was pretty interesting. It was gloomy with a sort of whiff of film noir, but only the scent of film noir. There's no detective subplot. If you ever wanted to know what a male hustler thinks, what goes through his mind, this book will singularly satisfy your curiosity. The main character ends up in a number of situations with different men, all who want his body, but have different ways of going about attaining it. Sure, they all pay him money for his body, for use of his body, but the buildup is always different, strange, absurd, and bizarre. The main character is largely passive, however. And by passive, I mean silent. He doesn't necessarily influence events. Uh, so throughout all of these liaisons, it's as if he's a fly on the wall. You don't need to be gung ho about your job, but in a narrative, I am expecting a character to affect the action. This character never does. He's involved in these situations where he's essentially just the narrator. Um, where he's a narrator, sort of giving his view of the situation about an event happening between two people. Um, Even when the narrator is there as a third party, but he never so much as interjects into the action. And besides the lack of story power the main character has, he drifts from city to city with little motivation for moving except for, well, I'm going to this city now. Uh, such things can happen in a book, but it feels awfully convenient that the main character was traveling to all of these places he needed to be in order to get the taste of gay hustling life in each major city. That would make this novel more compelling. It's unsurprising that the novel shares a lot of similarities with the writer's life. And I wonder how much of the motivations for moving from city to city were left out for personal reasons. The writing style was very interesting. As a gay man, I found this window into gay life fascinating. I wish the character and the story was written in a way to evince more personality, for the character to make more decisions and affect other people. If you like LGBT literature, this is a very solid read. 2 out of 5 stars. So you might have noticed that my outfit has changed a little bit since yesterday. And the reason for that is because I accidentally deleted everything. It's such a pain in the butt to get things from an iPhone to your PC. And sometimes you just accidentally delete everything. So I should say almost everything. I have the first part of this clip that I'm going to just use. Things happen, so oh well, here we go again. Severance. So this is not the same Severance that's on Apple TV Plus. It took me longer than I care to admit to realize that. I'm going to start by talking about this book's cultural reception because a large part of its relevance has been shaped from that. For example, Severance won the 2018 Kirkus Book Award. For those of you who don't know, Kirkus Reviews is a literary magazine. I've checked out quite a few of them, quite a few magazines, and I find Kirkus to just be the most accessible, best written, least pretentious of all the magazines out there. So I tend to read it quite often. Anyways, Severance won the 2018 Kirkus Prize for Fiction. It was also included as one of the best books of 2018 by Elle, BuzzFeed, Mental Floss, Vulture, Huffington Post, AV Club, Jezebel, and more. Additionally, it was nominated / shortlisted for the Goodreads Choice Awards, Locus Awards, BookTube Awards, and more. Now, a lot of people really like this book. There are really great reviews for it elsewhere online. It's not hard to see why. I'm going to give you my perspective on this book because while I appreciate its literary merits, my take is a little bit different. This book follows Candice Chen, who is sort of trust fund baby, a Chinese American born in China, raised in the States, who's dealing with the death of her mother after her father had already passed away. Candice is living on her inheritance in New York and working at a publishing house. Her job is mainly to deal with the production of new Bibles. Then the world collapses due to a fungal infection. Basically, this infection, Shen fever, makes you into a zombie, but not the aggressive type that seeks out brains. Instead, the zombies repeat old routines as their minds and bodies deteriorate. Uh, For some unexplained reason, Candice Chen is immune to Shen fever, so we follow her around as she leaves New York and stumbles upon a band of merry travelers who are looting the collapsing world around them. Probably surprising to no one that this book really resonated with readers during the COVID-19 pandemic. The loneliness, desolation, isolation, no doubt spoke to many people on a deep level. With a couple years' distance from the pandemic, though, the story felt less gripping to me. The first about 90% of the novel is very interesting in the ways that Candice navigates the world as a woman, the daughter of immigrant parents, a millennial, and as a millennial, the way she relates to her job, her romantic partners, her business colleagues. Unfortunately, I can't say anything much more insightful than the book asks a lot of interesting questions that I don't think it answers, which keeps me from absolutely loving this novel. That's not to be overcritical, though, because the first 90% is still very good. So I give Severance 4 out of 5 stars. It's really good. Wings Upon Her Back. Look, I like social revolutions. And as far as social revolutions go, the one in this book is pretty good. There's also a storyline about what to do when your boss is acting unethically, which is something I think most people can relate to because they've likely struggled with that at some point in their life. The choices available to you are either shutting up and dealing with it or letting it ruin your whole life. At a certain point, you can't shut up and deal with it. That's where the story starts. It's high fantasy. The beginning puts the main character, Zemeli, a fearsome warrior, into a precarious situation right away. Zemeli discovers one of the workers in the society she's living in. It's supposed to be mostly mecha. It's supposed to be mostly worshippers of the mecha god, but they have workers in there to do their manual labor. So she finds that this worker is worshiping the worker god, and this puts her into a precarious situation. It shouldn't. She should just report the worker and move on with her life. That's her job as a worshiper of the mecha god, as a warrior. Instead of reporting this person to the higher ups, though, she just lets it go, which is kind of a decision. Because Zemeli has trained her entire life to earn her wings and enforce the mecha god's will. But she's so burnt out physically, mentally, morally. You watch her make this decision in the beginning of the book, and it calls into the question the whole world. Who do you root for? Do you root for Zemeli? Is she doing a good thing? She is the main character, right? We're not going to switch perspectives, are we? And if we're not going to switch perspectives, then is Zemeli going to have a redemption arc? And if so, of what kind? The worshippers of the mecha god find out about Zemeli's sacrilege or dereliction of duty, and in a highly attended ceremony, they rip the wings right off her back, which is where the title comes from. So it seems impossible, according to the story logic, that Zemeli would have a redemption arc. These people are in charge of the wings, and short of overthrowing the established order, Zemeli can't get her wings back. So what is she going to do? The story dramatizes a lot of complex family relationships, ethical quandaries about work, and packs quite a thrill to boot. This was a book I couldn't put down. I stayed up late reading it, which is such a great feeling. The language in the book was somewhat straightforward and direct. That's not a mark against it. There were some moments of poetry when appropriate. I could have asked for more from this book, but the story still successfully achieved what it set out to do. This debut novel got really great reviews, and they're right. It was a starred review from Booklist, starred review from Kirkus, and Publishers Weekly called it intricate and intriguing. I give it 4.5 out of 5 stars. I'll definitely read Samantha Mills' next work. Another country. Trigger warning. I'm not sure how many trigger warnings to give here, so I'm just going to give you a blanket trigger warning. Please, caution advised. James Baldwin's Another Country is one of those books that so many guys have in their Hinge profiles. So I kept seeing the name and I thought, what the heck? Let me see what all the fuss is about. In the beginning of the book, Rufus Scott, a jazz drummer, unalives himself. The rest of the book explores the relationships among Rufus's acquaintances. So I'm going to get into a couple of spoilers here because I want to sketch the broad web of relationship that exists among these characters. I'm not ruining anything. The story deals with their relationships, so I want you to understand the sort of tension that exists among all of these people. It's set in approximately 1960s New York. So there's Eric. Eric is an actor. He was Rufus's first male lover, who moved to France in the meantime, where he began a relationship with Yves, a young Frenchman. Eric also has a tryst with Vivaldo at some point. Vivaldo is a struggling novelist, and he begins a relationship with Ida, who is Rufus's brother. Cass has an affair with Eric, and Cass is Richard's partner. Overall, the novel is pretty good. You seldom get stories about bisexuals, let alone messy love webs among several different orientations. The way Baldwin deals with race feels very authentic too. So when you add that factor into the mix, it makes this novel stand out as a seminal work of LGBT fiction. Now, Norman Mailer called the writing in this book abominable, which I find to be a little harsh. I don't think the writing was abominable at all. It certainly wasn't poetic, but the story never tries to be. It's hard to have multiple viewpoint characters and keep them all straight, haha, or to get the reader to care about each or any of them. This is usually the biggest reason I mark books as DNF, but Baldwin handles this quite succinctly. Though Another Country didn't leave a huge impression on me or greatly move me emotionally, I'm still happier for having read it. If you like LGBT narratives, American fiction, stories about New York City, or authentic Black voices, I definitely give this book a read. You won't be disappointed. 4 out of 5 stars. Crazy Rich Asians. This one has been on my TBR for a while, so I was happy to dive in. Here's how it starts. This is just the very beginning, so don't worry too much about spoilers. There's this group of Asian tourists who are denied lodging in their London hotel because they're wet and there's kids running around. So it's raining outside, it's London, this sort of thing happens. The manager turns them away even though they have reservations. It's racism. So the women, they're mostly women and children, go outside and make some phone calls. Cut to, the women and children go back inside with the hotel's billionaire owner in tow, who just happens to know a husband of these ladies. And what do you know? The hotel's billionaire owner is not only interested in selling the hotel, but he's already sold it to the husband of one of these ladies. The ladies, of course, immediately fire said hotel manager, which is a deserved moment of comeuppance. Then the story cuts to Nick in New York. He's an NYU professor, and unbeknownst to his girlfriend Rachel, Nick is fabulously wealthy. Other people overhear Nick's conversation with Rachel about bringing her to Singapore. They recognize him and start texting people around the world. Who's dating whom, who has dated whom, and all of the women talking about the eligible bachelor. Certainly, this book is an important salve against racism, and for that I truly applaud it. I'm glad to see more Asian representation. However, billionaire romances are just not the thing for me. So I mark this as DNF. A Single Man. This is the second book I read this year about the life of a college professor, where nothing really happens, but I absolutely love every second of the novel. The narrative, which takes place in 1962 and follows George as he grieves the loss of his partner Jim, is so moving and touching. These two men lived together in West LA somewhere, probably Santa Monica, because that's where the author historically lived. But maybe Palisades, maybe Venice. It's a small, rickety yet nice house. The book isn't actually clear about where they're staying. Uh, George goes inland, like south of Pasadena, to teach at somewhere that might be CSULA, where Isherwood actually taught. The main character deals with his grief by going to his job every day. Eventually, he strikes up a conversation with one of his students he knows is gay. In terms of plot, not much else happens. But listening to George deal with his grief was wondrous and healing. To know that someone else could have gone through all the same complicated emotions. If you like LGBT fiction, I'd highly recommend this story. What was the other novel about the life of a college professor that I can't say? I can spell it. Stoner. A Single Man gets 3.5 out of 5 stars. Now, you might be asking, how can I rank this lower than Another Country? The stars are my personal ranking. I could have wanted a lot more from this book. That's a mark against it in that the story could have achieved its own goals better by being a bit longer. But such a criticism doesn't detract from how enjoyable this novel is as it was published. It's still really, really good. Oryx and Crake. One of my friends told me how much he loves this book, so I made sure to prioritize it. In his words, it starts off as, what the fuck? But then you realize why it's so weird, and you love it. And that's exactly what happened. It's truly one of Atwood's best. Look at the cover design. Isn't it really neat? The story follows Snowman, aka Jimmy, as he navigates a post-apocalyptic world ravaged by, we're not exactly sure what. But if anyone can do post-apocalyptic, it's Margaret Atwood. I love her language, plotting, pacing. Loving Margaret Atwood is pretty uncontroversial, so I'll use my time to promote lesser-known authors. I will say some of the themes in this book involve climate change, the biopharma industry, and jealous lovers. So if any of those topics appeal to you, definitely add this one to your TBR. 4.5 out of 5 stars. Definitely read. It's amazing. Never Let Me Go. Okay. I'll admit, this book is also pretty well known. So well known, in fact, that it has been listed 4th on The Guardian's list of 100 best books of the 21st century. In 2024, the New York Times listed it 9th on the list of the 100 best books of the 21st century. Those works can be a pretty good way to find interesting novels you might not otherwise read, or maybe that you missed. You know, not everybody can read everything, or not everybody can have read everything. In fact, such a list is what motivated me to finally read this novel. It was actually Kirkus's review. When this novel was published, they wrote a masterpiece of craftsmanship that offers an unparalleled emotional experience. Send a copy to the Swedish Academy. And then Kazuhiro Izaguro won the Nobel Prize in 2017. And since it's just a bit of a theme this month, this book was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. 5 out of 5 stars. I'm realizing now that I'm reading a ton of books that were either won or were shortlisted for the Booker Prize. I'm reading The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. Maybe I should do a video where I read all of the Booker Prize books. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. The Obelisk Gate. This is the second book in the Broken Earth trilogy. They're well known. If you haven't read the first book, the 5th season, go read it. It's honestly top 10 for me. For the Obelisk Gate, I normally don't mind going against conventional wisdom. This book felt a little bit different because of how well received it has been in general. It wasn't working for me, even though I could understand its merit. So I did something that I don't normally do, which is I went in search of other people's opinions to see if anyone else felt this way. Alexander Niel of Tor.com said, "The Obelisk Gate is small and safe, where the fifth season was large and surprising. And although it builds out the world and its workings well, and establishes Nasun as a character no less complex by the end than Asun, it's a shame all the same that such a stunning start should be succeeded by such a sedentary, albeit completely readable, sequel." Uh, and I feel uh, and that really resonated for me because that's exactly how I felt. 3 out of 5 stars, sedentary, albeit completely readable. Next, I'm going to go into The Stone Sky, which is the third book in the Broken Earth trilogy. So it starts off with the fifth season, then goes to the Obelisk Gate, and finally concludes with The Stone Sky. Now, each of these won a Hugo. They actually won back-to-back Hugos. So I read this because I hadn't read the Broken Earth trilogy before, and I really, really respect N.K. Jemisin as a writer. So when I read this and it didn't move me emotionally, I looked up the aforementioned Alexander Niel to see how he would review The Stone Sky. He said he stood behind his previous review of the Obelisk Gate, but he raved about the third installment. So I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something here. I thought The Stone Sky was technically excellently done. A part of the issue is that I'm not always one for fantasy. Notwithstanding that, I still gave The Wings Upon Her Back a very high score. Just to give you a little bit of where I'm coming from, after I finished The Stone Sky, I thought, okay, that was enough N.K. Jemisin for me. I'm good. Then I watched her masterclass on writing fiction, which is one of the best masterclasses on fiction available. The other one, of course, being Margaret Atwood, who probably ties with her. In the masterclasses, N.K. Jemisin is one of the few writers who is prepared with specific actionable advice. It struck me in comparison to how most of the other writers available on masterclass were straight white men who, when asked for advice, chortled and said, "Well, I don't know. How is this done? Just be lucky, I guess." Which is a bit of a crude characterization, but that was my takeaway. And N.K. Jemisin was just leagues ahead of everybody else as one of the few black people or women interviewed for Masterclass. Having said all that, my takeaway would be definitely read the fifth season if you haven't already. And if you really like it, then launch into the next 2 books in the trilogy. But sometimes books just aren't for you, and that's okay. If you deeply appreciate but don't absolutely love the fifth season, then don't feel compelled to finish the rest of the trilogy just because N.K. Jemisin has so much positive press. It's certainly deserved, but you, as a reader, should read books because you want to, not because you feel pressured or obligated to do so. And I say this with nothing but love and respect for N.K. Jemisin. As a writer, she's one of the top 5 authors whose work I'm truly impressed by. As a reader for this novel, 2 out of 5 stars. Playground. So Playground has a very interesting start. I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction to it, so that way you can understand my review of it. So I'm not ruining anything. This is all from the first chapter. Playground. It took a disease-eating brain to help me remember. Ooh, that's pretty interesting. Under Lake Michigan, I found some other place to live to pretend like everything was fine. The only thing that helped was looking out from the castle and seeing myself walking across the bottom of the lake. Oh, so you're under Lake Michigan and you're walking across the bottom of it? It's pretty cool. It's a simple, small thing, but I've never told anyone but you. When I was young, I could breathe underwater. It's so eerie and captivating. I want to learn more. This man is dying and he can walk across the bottom of a lake and he could breathe underwater? All right, let's do this. Then we cut to island life, a bit of history, colonialism. The narrative seems pretty cool. We get the island of Makatea. Then the main character builds a social media company, which of course becomes super successful because the first rule of social media companies in fiction is that they always become overnight super successes. Same thing with social media influencers. Then there are multiple viewpoint characters. We really start bouncing all over. And throughout the novel, there's this whole business about resurrecting the one main character's sister, but that plot was left unresolved and not in the ambiguous way, for example, Margaret Atwood often spends her entire novels setting up. Just simply unresolved for no good reason. And then at the end, there's this sort of like then at the end, there's this moment where the main character is actually alive on the island, even though you thought he died. So I looked into that a little bit. There are some people saying the book is the sort you have to have an advanced degree in literature to understand. I'm characterizing a little bit there to try to give these people the benefit of the doubt. The other side of this, the other form of this argument is you're just not smart enough to understand it. So I do have an advanced degree in literature, though the jury is still out on whether or not I'm smart. But if this book is trying to accomplish the thing those critics are saying it's trying to accomplish, and I'm being intentionally vague here, then based on that criterion alone, the book fails even worse to do what it purports to set out to do. There are many, much better ways to accomplish that big goal. As it is, this book is not doing that. So either it's not very good or it's even worse, in my opinion. 2 out of 5 stars, which in retrospect seems kind of high, but I'm not one to revise my ratings after I make them. So, The House in the Cerulean Sea. I'll just come out and say it. This book was lovely. Recommended to me by several people. This book follows Linus, who's basically a social worker for magical wayward youths. He needs to make sure that they're being treated well in their respective orphanages. He's summoned to investigate an orphanage on a remote island. When there, we meet the 6 children, and it's really not hard to follow at all. The plot lines are extremely enjoyable and cute without being cloying. There's also a gay romance, which was somewhat unbelievable, but you read this book for the magical orphanage and found family. You don't care so much about the plot holes. And look, I'm all for body positivity, but I'm not clear on why this supposedly very handsome man, Arthur Parnassus, the head of the specific orphanage that Linus is investigating, I'm not clear on why he's single in the first place, why he would go for someone with a self-described spare tire and other disheveledness. Seems like just a mismatch, especially when I didn't find them having a lot of commonalities to begin with to inform their relationship. But with a saccharine tone such as this, it works in the way that rom-coms work. You kind of just say, okay, now they're together. No spoilers. Even the big plot reveal at the end isn't that big of a reveal. Nor is it terribly relevant or clear why it was hidden in the first place. But that's just the thing. You're not reading The House in the Cerulean Sea to try to outwit the author as you would read Agatha Christie. You read The House in the Cerulean Sea because it's really enjoyable, and you just stop asking critical questions and have fun for once. So, 4 out of 5 stars. Him. What if Jesus were born a woman? Interesting concept for a book, right? What if Jesus were born a woman named Abigail, but then Abigail decided to live as a male named Yeshua? Really cool, right? Wouldn't history have turned out much differently if Jesus were not a cis male? We'll never know, because this book focuses mostly on the mother, Miriam, her life, her kids. Yeshua leaves in the beginning, and though there are instances when Miriam and Yeshua interact, for the majority of the book, Yeshua is not there. It's crazy that in a book called Him, the titular character wasn't present. It felt it felt off to have the book be about one premise, but then never deliver on it. I held out until the end, hoping that there would be some grand denouement and climax or twist at the end, or anything. There wasn't. Add in the unfortunate fact that the cover has a recommendation by Neil Gaiman, 2 out of 5 stars. Transmutation, Transience. So I'm going to give a little context on the book at first, so that way you can understand my take. It starts out with some tropey fun, some twists at the beginning. The very first page goes, contextual notes. As a work of speculative history, Transmutation Transience is not an attempt to render a perfect record of the past. It operates under the Ganting theory, seeking to explain present circumstances via plausible recreations of historical moments and or personages. The Ganting theory is totally made up, but I'm here for it. It seems very premisey. Maybe they'll do something with it. Then there's a whole list of characters, okay, about 3 pages. The novel itself starts with a chase where the character Ronnie follows a bunch of kids who are supposedly insurgents. They all go into a tunnel of some sort. She's captured, or so it seems. Then the viewpoint shifts to Duncan. Okay, I know this book is supposed to involve multiple universes, so I'll stick with it for now. And then another character named Yorick starts explaining stuff. There are about a dozen more names mentioned, some sticky dialogue, and then we switch to Trest's point of view. They're talking about all of these worlds, and I still don't know where I am in terms of story, or a point of view, or sadly, why I should care. Page 30, 50 or so, and I'm still not sure. Add to it that the writing is schlocky and tropey without being terribly interesting. And DNF. Titanium Noir. This is a sci-fi mystery. It's very entertaining, and the whole of it was very good. Let me tell you why, so you can decide if this is for you. Cal Sounder is a detective who investigates incidents related to Titans. These are genetically altered people who are a lot bigger and stronger than normal humans. We start on a murder scene. The story flows. Police business. Sleek, scummy, New York City, controversial gene therapies. All of the things you would want in a sci-fi mystery. There were moments, I'm thinking about the build-up to the bar fight scene, that were so on the nose I almost put the book down. But the whole of it was so good, I kept going for a little longer, which got me to the good parts, of which there were a lot. Titanium Noir doesn't have an intricate plot that needs to be solved, but it did leave you guessing. In tone, this book would be closer to Minority Report or Chinatown. So if those movies speak to you, then you'll almost definitely love this book. But then the end resolved so quickly, you kind of wish that something different had happened. I hope that anything unconventional, any twist on a conventional trope had happened, since there were so many bends and curves throughout the whole book. The ending does factor into my final analysis, but it's not the entire calculation. So I give this book 3.5 out of 5 stars. I quite like this one. Invisible Cities. This is supposedly a postmodern book, like the book Gadsby by Ernest Vincent Wright, which, if you don't know, is a novel that was written without using the letter E. So these sorts of books are interesting artistic endeavors. It'd be wrong to judge them using the same metrics you use to judge a more commercial book. All of this is stuff I wish I had known before reading Invisible Cities. I had heard a lot of people say positive things about it. By the time I got done, I realized the sort of book it was, which is not the sort of thing I would prioritize right now. It was cute. It talked about fictitious cities. It helped me reconceptualize my understanding of modern so-called cities. 2 out of 5 stars. Tomb of Sand. I can tell you this is a story about an old woman's convalescence, or it's a metafictional narrative. But neither of those two things is entirely accurate. The truth is, I have no idea what this book is about. I'm not sure I've quite figured it out yet. It was good, but that doesn't do this book justice. Honestly, I have no idea where this recommendation came from, but the Booker Prize is usually pretty good, so I thought to check it out. I'm quite stumped about this one, but in the way that I really love to be puzzled. So if that's appealing to you at all, I would highly recommend this book. 3.5 out of 5 stars. Alias Grace. Amazing. Maybe my favorite Margaret Atwood, but not for the reasons you might think. It does everything that you expect in one of her books. The ambiguous ending, but not in the way you want it, which feels so satisfying. My usual disappointment in stories written from multiple viewpoint characters doesn't hold in this case. This could actually be a very good example of using different viewpoint characters. Grace is narrated in the first person, while Dr. Jordan is told from the third person. It's not the only technique that makes the conflict in this novel so fresh and exciting, despite it being a work of historical fiction, but I certainly think it helps keep the point of views separate in the reader's mind. Additional points of view are given via letters, which is an even cleverer move on Margaret Atwood's part. What is it about? So a woman is accused of murder. We don't know if it's false or not. She's been in jail for over a decade. The woman herself doesn't know whether or not she committed the murder because she doesn't have a memory of it. So this man, Dr. Jordan, he's on the forefront of the nascent field of psychology. He comes to Toronto to work with Grace to figure out if he can help her tap into her memory. So it's a very early take on the intersection of psychology, the prison system, women's rights. It's lovely. It's just such a good story. 5 out of 5 stars. Also, it won the Booker Prize. Dawnhounds. I was reading this book, and I was about a quarter of the way in, and I thought to myself, what is this book about? And I couldn't tell. I could not verbalize the description of what the book was about. So I had to check the description, which says, a police officer is murdered, brought back to life with a mysterious new power, and tasked with protecting her city from an insidious evil threatening to destroy it. And that didn't quite tell me more than I already knew. One thing I liked about the book was they used the word köpek, which means dog in Turkish, which I also speak, totally unrelated to anything else. Of course, I initially came to this book because I wanted to enjoy a queer Maori-inspired fantasy novel. But the writing feels pretty foggy. It does take place on the docks and around the ocean, so fog would be appropriate, but it was hard to follow. It was predictable, and it wasn't terribly interesting. For a better example of what I would call foggy, look at Ursula Le Guin's Rokanan's World, which does a much better job at this sort of writing, where you feel like you're looking through a kaleidoscope until you get to the end and everything makes sense. But the writing in Dawnhounds wasn't so offensively bad as to make me say DNF. So I finished it, and I'll give this a 1 out of 5 stars. So let's look at my monthly scores. So my average this month is a 3.16, which brings my yearly average to 3.089.
Thanks so much for tuning in this week. Consider supporting independent bookstores by purchasing these books via the bookshop link on my website. Don't forget to like and subscribe. You never know when the next buzzy book is going to drop.